Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff-Summers.
And I'm Danielle Crittenden, and we're joined in the studio with Zoe Appler, as always.
Hello.
I always feel we forget to introduce Zoe up the top, and then she weighs in, and then people go, "Who's that voice?" But we all know it's Zoe. So
I'm just the conscience that's speaking.
The conscience of the podcast.
Yes.
conscience of the actually,
Or the chorus,
Yeah.
the Greek chorus.
yeah. Well, whatever we were going to talk about today, and not Game of Thrones. Can I just reiterate? It can't be Game of Thrones again.
You know, that this is a character failure in both of you. Even if you're not interested, you have to keep up with the culture.
I get the memes. I've been educated on the memes.
Not enough.
Anyway, see, look, you almost did it again.
Okay.
You turned it into a
Okay.
Anyway,
Moving on.
You were all, as you sometimes get, on our drive to the studio. And again, it's a beautiful day. And you start telling me what Twitter wars you're in.
I know. I had some wars.
You had some wars. And not only did you have wars, you had wars with Hollywood.
Hollywood personalities. There go our hopes for Femsplainers, the movie.
Would it be more like Sex and the City movie or more like Thelma and Louise?
Yeah, I want to know, would you play yourselves
Or more like
someone else?
the Golden Girls gone bad.
I don't think we're quite at the golden.
No.
But we're
You know what? I'm afraid to look to their ages. They might.
Yeah, they
be
might-
Like
they might.
51.
Yeah, I just feel that all women looked older then, and it wasn't just because of plastic surgery or something. Maybe it's just the hairstyle.
They all look like Mamie Eisenhower. And
Like,
just,
at, like, a
just
certain
Google
point,
her, like
they could
tight.
be 32 and
Right.
they look like
They
Mamie
would-
Eisenhower. Yeah, no, it's funny that. Okay, but anyway, so let's get through your Twitter wars. And then
Well, I had a little trouble with someone you may know who's actually pretty funny, but Busy Phillips. She tweeted about. It was actually a video, and then it was tweeted by lots of people about.
is she in Game of Thrones?
No, she was in Freaks and Geeks.
the high school version of Game of Thrones, Freaks and Geeks.
Oh, the audience. She was in the audience of Game of Thrones. Freaks and Geeks. High five to Zoe.
Uh-oh, all right.
Sorry, Busy Phillips. Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Got it.
She tweeted about how, and she did it in vocal fry, so it was kind of torture to hear her talk about how important it is for women to talk about their periods. Because, and just listen to a bit of it.
I mean, to be totally honest, and I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, but like if men had their periods, it would be like fucking celebrated. You know, it would be like a holiday. They would get the week off of work and probably the week before and then like the 4 days after their period ends so that they could recover.
That was an essay of Gloria Steinem.
In
back
1978, like 41 years ago, Jimmy Carter was president, and she wrote about if men could menstruate, it would
was
be a
actually
sacred.
funny.
And
It was a
it
very
was, and memorable and witty.
Right. It would be like you can imagine these jocks and like, I had an extra large tampon today.
Yeah.
Like she did do it. It was a very funny piece.
It was. She could be funny, and I'm sure Busy Phillips can, but she's borrowing old material.
Angrily.
And if something that half the population does. She did get attacked by some trans followers who insist that men can menstruate too.
Yes, and they can have babies.
Babies and abortions.
They can have abortions. Yep.
So I just tweeted that, but politely, but I did quote tweet her, which is a little aggressive, that because it annoyed me. Everything about it annoyed me. And I just said,
How you react?
this is not how men achieved power. They didn't come to power by whining about their bodily excretions. This is just not a path to end. It's a path to sort of women sitting in circles, kvetching. I mean, do you think that men, how often do they sit around and talk about jock itch?
Maybe this is the secret locker room banter. That
They're
everything
actually-
it's like, do you think that the locker room banter is this like, it's in a vault and
And they're talking about their freely and in an
grabbing by-
animated way about their nocturnal emissions and their jock itch. No, this is female narcissism. And so I tweeted that, and then most people agreed with me, but
You got a lot of retweets or something on that.
yes, but then several people thought that I was snarky and insensitive. And then I said, I'm not being snarky. And then I sent another tweet that's saying if she really wants to help women, she would help them unlearn vocal fry. Because and then I got in trouble. Some leftists said, "Oh, this is a so-called feminist. She wants to help women by shaming them." I'm not shaming. I am being motherly.
We are kind of ridiculing. We're not shaming, maybe, but we are.
They need to be. If my daughter did that and talked that way, I would, in a kindly way, suggest she take lessons in elocution.
Right. This is we've talked about this in the past, where Hollywood actors and actresses would go get voice lessons, so you could learn to talk like this.
Well, you don't have to talk
Very smooth.
No, there are all sorts of ways to have a lyrical voice. Vocal fry and uptick are just not among them.
Would it be any better if she had said, if half the population had their periods, we wouldn't have this bleep problem?
I think I kind of agree with that. No, because it's hard for people to take you seriously, and they don't know it, and they don't even know that they do it, and it's bad for your vocal cords.
Yeah, I don't even know how you do it. I mean, is it like a habit?
You just
or
go
is it
down.
just your voice?
Well,
See, I did it. Voice.
It's a habit. It's a bad habit. It sounds like you've been smoked. So take a beautiful young girl. She's a beautiful young woman, but her voice sounds like a woman who smoked 2 or 3 packs of cigarettes for 40 years.
You sure it's just not her natural voice?
No, it can't
She
be.
might have smoked that many cigarettes. She smoked a lot of cigarettes on Freaks and Geeks. That was her, because her character was a rebel.
Well, I kind of admire that. Or if you came by it honestly, then I respect
cigarettes.
it. By
Alcohol
cigarettes and
is fine. All
whiskey.
right. Okay, so you've
So then there's
pissed off Busy Phillips.
I don't know. She's. I don't know if she's noticed, but a lot of her fans and others think that. And even some of my followers who like me say, I like you, but you were wrong here, and women shouldn't be shamed for their periods. Who's shaming anybody for their periods? Maybe in India, in rural villages. Who's shaming people for their
Well,
periods?
it's because we can't talk about it.
Who
Like, we
wants
don't-
to talk
Well,
about it?
I like to talk about picking my nose. And
I like
think
to talk
should
about
have the
sneezing.
right- No.
And nasal mucus.
Nasal mucus is a very important topic. I'm
And it's
tired
been
of
rendered
being
invisible. It's been rendered invisible.
Yeah, it's just like you want to talk about your boogers, and people go, "Oh, that's gross," and I'm like, "Hey, it's natural.
It's natural.
Like farting."
And-
you know which men talk about their body functions? 13-year-old boys,
Yes.
12-year-old boys.
They do.
So
They're
maybe
shameless.
we want to be more like 13-year-old boys.
Oh, this should be our goal.
Yeah.
No, it should not be our goal. And just let it go. And also, it was 41 years ago. It made sense. In 2019, stop talking about what. This is just something that worries me. There is this obsession, an abiding obsession among feminists to talk about themselves. And I mean literally their bodies, their vaginas,
Called navel gazing.
navel gazing. And, there's a big world out there.
Worse.
Yes. Well, that was another thing. In our consciousness raising, you were supposed
to talk about other gazing. Oh,
there was there were
Ovary gazing.
there were mirrors.
Worse.
Oh,
But but let's move from.
have you ever taken a mirror and gazed?
No.
Because
Said it feminist. I once went to a feminist conference. I'm not joking. Where this was again 20 years ago, but as you say, back when
back in the day,
thing, that every woman in the room. This is a public women's conference, and one of the breakout sessions was asked to
lie on the
just enjoy looking at yourself, and I was.
That is complete, a weird kind of narcissism.
Well, my only question left with Busy Phillips is, does she have a sibling named Lazy?
I like the name Busy.
Yeah, it's a funny name. Anyway,
That's a good name for.
okay. So what other Twitter?
Well, then I got in trouble. I can't even explain this one, but can you explain it?
Yes.
Zoe's explaining it.
Yes.
Zoe knows which one. Okay.
So an article was published on tolerance.org, which is
the opposite. Just go to tolerance.org and it's all about intolerance. So everyone, it's an intersectional nightmare.
Intolerance.org. So there was an interview about white fragility with a woman named Robin DiAngelo. And so a famous Hollywood director who was the director of Selma and of the recent Wrinkle in Time remake with Oprah.
I liked Selma. I thought Wrinkle in Time was unwatchable, but moving on.
Okay. So she retweeted the article, and she retweeted and said, in quotes, "As a white person, I have a racist worldview. I have racist biases. I have racist patterns and investments in the system of racism. I also have investments in not seeing anything I just said because of what it suggests about my identity as a good person." So Christina retweeted this and commented, "This sounds like a forced confession from a terrified captive."
Yes, it does. This confession, and it
covers everything, right? Like she can't say anything.
She can't say anything
I thought
without acknowledging her infinite sinfulness. It has religious overtones, something out of Jonathan Edwards and this angry God, and you can't appease him because you are so infinitely sinful, and we white people must confess and for our sins. And where is this going?
Well, I thought when you first read that title of that article, I thought you were saying white frigidity. And if you didn't apply it to women, but you could appeal to that old WASP ideal of, being very frosty and uptight. And speaking of periods, that we could kind of hearken back to some of that, maybe repressing it.
Because there's a reason.
Having nice silver on the
that
side.
I think it was Socrates that came up with the words TMI, too much information. There's a reason we have that phrase. It's just not necessary.
So we could support white frigidity?
White frigidity would be a step towards progress. Let's go back.
But does she say any of the statements that made her, or is it just everything that comes out of your mouth?
None of it makes any sense, but it threatens to be, the new religion of college-educated students. By the way, not to go back to Vocal Fry, but I read a little bit about it. Do you know who does it?
Who?
College. 2/3 of of young women in college.
Oh yeah,
it's a college phenomenon.
So it's really but you're saying it's a taught thing.
Well, they're imitating Kim Kardashian. I think she does it.
But you have to. You don't unconsciously do it. I mean, you have to kind of work at it.
Yeah, but it might be something you imitate, and how you imitate an accent.
Look, if these women just were quiet, like this article suggests, then we wouldn't have Vocal Fry. It's a win-win.
Well, this director blocked Christina, so
then I got blocked by a Hollywood director because I made fun of the tolerance tweet because it seemed so intolerant.
Well, she may have done, if she had done the Femsplainer movie, you know what she would have called it, and then we wouldn't have been happy. She would have called it Wrinkles in Time.
I thought you were going to say white frigidity.
And that.
Christina, if we've covered your Twitter for this week,
I don't know. There's could be anything happening there. I don't know.
No, stop. Zoe, turn off her internet. What I want to do is introduce our guest this week because it's about a topic of, I think, pretty universal interest. Her name is Rebecca Eckler. She's a very well-known journalist, international best-selling author, most recently of the new book that we're going to talk to her about, called Blissfully Blended Bullshit: The Uncomfortable Truth of Blending Families.
The truth about step parents.
And it's not just confined to Disney people.
But even Well, you know what? I'm going to challenge some of that, but let's move on.
But anyway, but what is sort of wonderful about Rebecca is, and I've read her stuff going way back, is she's one of these authors. It's like our guest Mandy Statmiller.
She tells the truth.
Well, not just the truth. I mean, speaking of not
censoring too much information. We're going to get too much information. What a bad mom she was.
No, she's very candid about herself, and she's candid about her situation, and she's candid about her relatives and ex-relatives. So I'm sort of curious to know how that plays out. But just to take a step back, and this fact is in her book, that 60% of blended families fail. You and I, well, you were the blender in your family. And
yes, Tamler.
I was the blendee.
Yes, I have a stepson, Tamler, but he better agree with this or he's in trouble. But
you mean
we had a wonderful relationship. You know, I think stepmothers can get a bad rap. Even Abraham Lincoln had a stepmother who was very kind and appreciated his genius. I was the same way with Tamler.
But you came in. So what was maybe the one or two things that you felt made your relationship?
Well, I think
very young,
he was
right?
very young, and he would later lose his mother. But she and I were friends, and she was very supportive of. All of us loved him like crazy, and Fred was very devoted. My late husband, and the mother, Shula, his mother was very devoted, and part of being a good mother is she wanted him to be happy when she was with us, and plus she and I just liked each other.
Okay, but was there? I mean, I guess was there an adjustment period? Like, how did?
Yes, there was. There was when I first was there. They were fighting, and she wasn't. But how did I handle it with Tamler? I'll tell you something else. He was so young, and I was relatively young. Mm-hmm. He was like my little brother.
Yeah.
And then when I had Fred, we had his stepbrother David. Tamler was 13 or 14 years older. And then, so David was like his little brother. Somehow it all worked.
Like the family pet.
Everybody, David was the pet.
So there wasn't that kind of, because sometimes you bring a biological child, and Rebecca did this, we'll talk to her about this, into a blended family situation. And that can cause new rivalries and tensions.
Oh, reading her book, I just felt like, boy, did I dodge a bullet, because to have children 7 or 8 years old, and then you marry somebody that has kids that old, and they get together, it's very, very hard.
Well, I grew up in a very blended family. I have 4 parents, or had 4 parents at one point. Father, stepmother, both have died, but growing up, they were there. And then I had a stepfather and my mother.
The best stepfather ever.
Oh, gosh.
He was really your dad.
He was. And even though I had a real father, I think the credit went to my mother, who, there has to be somebody in the family. I mean, all were good sports about it. Pete was amazing. But there had to be someone who was kind of managing the relations. And often that does fall to the mother/stepmother. And I think that's why it really worked. I mean, he came into my life at a very early age. My parents divorced when I was like 5. What was different then, and this would have been the late 60s, 1970, was I think divorce, it was just starting to happen more and more, but it was still relatively rare. So both sets of my parents, both parents, father and mother, got remarried within a couple of years. And both treated the remarriage like a marriage. That my mother, I never saw her date. I know she did date it, like she told me later. But I wasn't introduced to my future stepfather until it was extremely serious. And then my mother wanted to make sure that it was going to work. That she wouldn't have just married someone and then said, well, the kids will have to, it'll all work out, the kids. So what she did is she set up a day for us to all go out with this prospective stepfather, which we didn't know, right? We just thought, okay, she's taking us somewhere. And my stepfather he was like a boy at heart. I used to joke that I didn't get a new father. I got a new, much more, a really fun older brother. He took us to, in one day, we were in Toronto, so he took us to Niagara Falls, an amusement park, and a miniature village, all in one day. He said the best day of our lives. And we were with my new future stepbrother and my brother.
Miniature village.
It was a miniature village. And we were coming in the car back, so three of us, my brother, me, my stepbrother, future stepbrother, and a little sand bucket because I got car sick and I would throw up. And we were in the back of a Dodge Dart wearing no seatbelt.
God.
And he said to my mom, I didn't hear, my mom told me later again, he said, I wish everything in this car was mine.
Oh.
And he just he was family ready, and he loved my mom, and he would go on to love us, but it was a role taken seriously. That it was a marriage, and you're with grown-ups, and they come with kids. In this case, they're in their 30s and 40s, and you didn't just expect the children to that there was work at it. And my mother most profoundly was the person who worked to have us all be a family, and we were all treated very equally, and my stepfather was, of course, wonderful fun. But I look now and I see, when I look at series of people living together, kids having different men coming through the house or different mothers, and there be no kind of rules or structure that I went from a very problematic marriage where my father often wasn't home to suddenly a complete
Stable family.
Yeah, redone nuclear family. That's what they did. But I think now it's far more fluid and unstable, and kids don't have that sense of, okay, well, this is for life, surely. So it's an interesting problem, and I think Rebecca really explores every angle of that in her book.
Very honestly.
Very honestly. So let's bring Rebecca on and talk to her about her modern day experience. Welcome to the Femsplainers.
Thank you for having me.
We're so glad to have you, but the first thing we need to know is your favorite cocktail.
I am a tequila gal.
A margarita?
Straight
I
up?
like margaritas. I like tequila and soda. I like straight up tequila shots. I'm a tequila girl.
Do you have a favorite tequila? Are you like a reposada person or?
Oh, I'm not that fancy.
Oh, you're a cheap shot tequila girl.
Yeah, I'm a cheap shot, and I'm a cheap drunk too. So.
Well, you fit right in here
but
with the
yeah,
Femsplainers.
tequila, vodka.
We shame a lot of things, but we would never cocktail shame.
We don't cocktail shame.
You don't cocktail shame. One of the things I love and have always loved about your writing, because we're both from Toronto originally, and I've followed your writing over the years, and you're always very raw and candid. You never hold anything back. And so it was kind of, I think, refreshing to read a book about trying to blend families and be a step-parent and have stepchildren from your perspective, because you just let it fly, basically. So tell us about what drove you to write this and
what happened.
And set us up a little about what happened.
Okay, well, I should start at the beginning to explain
Yes.
my blended family, which was I met a guy, and we got along, and he was actually the first father I had dated after my divorce with my daughter's father. So he was the first father I dated. So he had 2 children, and I had a daughter. And then together we had a son together. So we were really blended. There was 4 children between the 2 of us. And why I wrote about it, and so candidly, was because, for the first couple of years, it was really, really good. And we were all blissful. We were blissful and blended. And then I don't know what happened. Something just turned. Maybe we got on each other's nerves. A bunch of resentment grew. And there was nothing out there on what happened after you blended. Like what to do after you blend and all these problems pop up. There's a lot out there, a lot of articles on tips before blending, what you should talk about before blending. Of course, we talked about none of that because we were in love. And, looking back, obviously we rushed into it, but I realized there was nothing out there. And even my girlfriends who were in blended families or had been in blended families, they wouldn't tell me anything until I would bring it up first. Like we would go out for drinks and I would be like, I can't believe he did this. And a girlfriend would be like, that happens all the time in my family. And I'm like, why don't you people speak up? Someone needs to speak up. So I really wrote this, and it is really candid, and everybody says it's so raw and real and almost uncomfortable at some points to read because it is so true. And I say this all the time, but I write as if no one is reading, and that's probably why I'm so candid, because I can't write any other way.
And so the first 2 years, everyone was on their best behavior, and you were, the Brady Bunch, a happy blended group of cooperative people.
Well, we weren't the Brady Bunch because we both had exes. So
that's
the Brady Bunch.
Exes who were alive.
They didn't have exes.
Yeah, the exes complicated.
And that's actually a big part of the book is like you realize when you're in a blended family, you're still tied to the ex. Right?
You're tied to the ex and their parents.
You're tied
Those
to
are the grandparents.
You made this point that
exactly.
Even the dog comes into it.
Was there a dog involved? Don't tell me there were
variations of people who have to get along. And people don't understand, like even my parents, they, in their generation, they barely understood divorce, let alone blended families. So, so I write about, how I perceived they thought about the blended families. And, once my now ex, obviously, spoiler alert here, but we didn't work out. At one point I write in the book how my now ex-mother-in-law told me that the love she had for my son, which came from her son, was different than the love she had for my daughter. And of course, I'm like mama bear. I'm like, how could you possibly say this? Both came out of me, but no, she did say the love was not the same that she had for her biological grandson than my daughter.
Well, I want to get to that. That's one of the points I want to raise, but just before we get there, so you've done a good sort of summary of what happened, but I want to go back to what you would describe as your complete lack of preparation for this situation. And you have a quote in the book pretty soon on that said, you meet this guy, you fall quickly in love. He's 2 or 3 months out of leaving his house, out of his marriage. So from his kid's perspective, he's just left their mother, and then you guys fall in love, and then you write, there was no sitting down and talking about the logistics, no discussion of how it would affect the kids, no dialogue over who would pay for what, no talk of disciplining each other's children, or if the ugly leather chair he is so attached to would be better left on the side of the road. So you guys pretty quickly move in together, you throw your families together, and that seemed, especially amongst your friends, that seems to be a common thing, right? People fall into this?
Truth be told, he was a guy who, he was just the type of guy I never had dated before, and I guess I found that kind of appealing. But that being said, I was also nearing 40, and I knew I wanted another baby. So I actually say this in the book too, and I don't like using the word ultimatum, but I did say to him, I do want another baby. So, you can have your 9 months to think about it. I won't bring it up at all. And I didn't. And he actually came back to me much sooner, saying, yes, he wanted a baby. So, there was a biological rush in the sense to have another baby because I had my son when I was 40. And so in that way, and that's why he actually moved in, is because we got pregnant. I did make him get a reverse vasectomy. Well, not make him. I mean, I didn't hold it.
Did he bring that ugly leather chair?
Yes, he did. And he took everything when he left, except that ugly leather.
Oh, no.
That's for irony.
Okay, so you're saying part of the rush, but here's what I was finding puzzling, and then I want to get to the sort of biological love versus step-parent love. That from what I sort of see in these situations, and I think it is common as you described it, that the approach of a couple today, and divorce is very common. These now blended families are more common. The approach is, well, if we love each other, it'll work. And you're looking at it, or the couple is looking at it, much more from the couple's perspective, and then saying, and then the chips will fall where they may. Or if we love each other, therefore our kids will love it too. Like, it's great for everybody, except you're not looking at it from the perspective of the others. You're really looking at it from you as a couple. Is that fair?
Yeah, and looking back, yes, I think that on his end, he had only moved out for a few months. So from his end, definitely, I don't think his daughters were over the divorce. But my daughter, it had been 7 years. So she had seen me go out on dates, and she just watching me go out on dates. She loved meeting my dates. But on the other end, I 100% agree that he rushed into it, or we both rushed into it. And, he also lived a little outside of Toronto. So his girls' lives changed. Like, they didn't have any friends in the area. They had to share a room at my house because that was the last remaining room. They didn't get to pick their room. They didn't get, like I said in the book, they didn't even get to pick where they sat at the kitchen table when I thought about it, because I would sit where I sat, and my daughter Rowan would sit where she sat, and then everyone else kind of,
Wait, just to be clear, so they all moved into a house you owned?
Yes, and that too, I think, was a big mistake. Again, hindsight is 20/20. I think it would have been much different if we had found a place together, or even, quite honestly, if I had moved into his place, because I don't know, there's a lot of men now who I've asked a lot of blended families when I was writing this book how they work. And it seems like a lot of men do not mind moving into the woman's house anymore, which is, fine, whatever. But from the woman's point of view, it's like, I've worked so hard to get where I am, and you move in, and yes, we're in love. So, but yeah, for 7 years, he didn't chip in for rent or mortgage.
You paid the mortgage. He didn't pay any.
He paid groceries and I think, Rebecca, nothing else.
Did he earn less than you? Did he earn a lot less? Did he earn a lot less than you?
I couldn't tell you because I could never get an answer about that.
Yeah, see, there were these warning signs like that. I found that really, really interesting. That I think you're right. I mean, I think that's the moving into your house or any woman's house, or even a woman moving into a man's house, that it's to get a new house together or apartment, whatever it is symbolic. It means like you're starting over. It's going to be ours.
Everybody's adjusting and finding their place at the same time.
Right.
The girls may have felt like they were guests at your house.
Well, and he definitely felt like he was a free riding tenant from your descriptions. Right. And
well,
didn't that bug you? Like, he didn't offer anything, and in fact, as you point out, it was half owned by your ex-husband. So
that's right. So he kind of felt, every time something broke down, he didn't realize, but just because my ex was paying for half of it, there's other things that go into a house. Like, I have a pretty large lot. Like, I had to pay for a gardener. That was a lot. And, I had to, I hate to say this because it sounds so, snotty, but, when we had the baby, I paid for the night nurse for, 3 months. There's thousands and thousands of dollars. I really do feel like in the money, if we're talking about money, that I shelled out way more. And I do know this because suddenly, as soon as he moved out, he could afford to rent another place, and he was going on vacations all the time.
And he took your car?
And every time he drives out with my car, my heart sinks a little. Yes, I had given him my, old car, which wasn't that old. It only had 50,000 kilometers on it. So it wasn't, it was still in good shape. I had given him that. But I think maybe I'm just kind of a generous person. I didn't, and it wasn't until after, people were saying to me, yeah, he's always been like that. You never saw that. And I guess, you know what? Honestly, let's just get back to the biology. I had love goggles on. I wanted a baby. Here was this man who at the start treated me like gold, and I had love goggles on. What can I say?
You were in love with him.
The truth.
You were in love with him at the time. Is that true? Or
Yes. Yes, I was definitely in love with him.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to the challenges. And you wrote what we were talking about earlier about love being different, as he put it, or his mother put it, for biological kids or grandkids versus stepkids. And that didn't strike me as crazy or unreasonable. It struck me as quite realistic. Is that? I mean, I think you didn't feel the same way to his kids that you felt about your own daughter.
Absolutely. She was just the first one to say it out loud. That's why it was kind of a shock.
You mean the mother-in-law?
The mother-in-law, yeah. She was just the first one to say it out loud. And people usually don't say things like that, right? As I say in the book, think it. You don't say it. Mm-hmm. But, yeah, I do say in the book. And I also, when we started to unblend, it's funny when you're in a second, I call them second chance relationships. When you're in your second relationship, you realize different things. And I realized instantly when I fell out of love with him. And even though I had fallen out of love with him because my daughter had been hospitalized for something.
Oh, yeah. Tell this story. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. So my daughter was hospitalized for something. Her father happened to be with her at the time. And he said, I'm going to the hospital. So, of course, I raced to the hospital. And my partner at the time, he was coming home from a business trip, and he went to a Halloween party. Even though he knew that I was at the hospital with my daughter, and I say, you made many bad choices that night, right? Yes, you might have gotten drunk on the plane, but what sobers you up more than your own child being in the hospital? But it wasn't his own child. It was my child. And I can tell you with 100% certainty, if it was his child who was being admitted to the hospital, he would have been there. But he decided to go to the party, a Halloween party, which is the instant I fell out of love. But yet, for 2 years, I still kept trying. And I don't know if that's because I thought maybe things could change. I kept saying that to myself, things are going to change. He's going to, contribute more. All the resentments I thought would change. And I realized this is a funny part of the book, is he suggested couples counseling. And I was like, he's like, I'll pay for it. I'm like, great. After 2 sessions, he's like, I can't afford to pay for couples counseling. I was just like, this is.
What happened in the counseling? Did the counselor take sides?
I don't even think we heard a word what she said, because you go to couples counseling and let's be honest, you're just arguing in front of someone else. You're just paying someone to.
Well, a good person will presumably direct you, but you just said she kind of sat there and didn't help and took the money. But what struck me also about that hospital story, maybe this is, I want to kind of get to the root of this. Failure of this, union, but also the premise going in with people who are thinking about blending. The thing that struck me about the hospital story is it's clear at that point in your relationship, things were going wrong. So he was probably, already filled up with his resentments, correctly or not, and
100%.
And okay, her dad's there, fine, I'm going to go to my party. You could sort of look at it from a churlish thing. What was striking to me was, I don't think, not that he didn't care for your daughter, but he didn't care for you. Like, you don't have to be a super genius to think, well, I'm not really worried about the kid. She's got 2 parents there, but you needed him. And that was the point, right? Like, he was just indifferent to your plight. And that kind of gets back to the main problem.
He would say that I had told him not to come, which could 100% be true. My problem with that is, even if he had told me not to come to the hospital, if his daughter was in the hospital, you could bet your ass 100% I would be sitting in that waiting room. I would be bringing food. I would be bringing clothes. Even if he said stay away, I would still be there. Maybe not right in the room, but I would be in the hospital. And he was at a Halloween party, and he said to me, well, I had my phone on me. And I was like, okay, you're at a Halloween party. You're going to hear a text coming in. I mean, and I had to walk him through this, actually. Okay, your first bad step was, getting off the plane, and you saw my text, but you went home. You changed into costume. Then you took another Uber to the party. There were many, many bad choices, and it was actually the first time. We were together for 7 years. It was the first time he actually said, I'm sorry, in 7 years.
Well, that's I think that's a general male problem, not to condemn all men on this one. But one of the things, and this is what it raises when you go like the Halloween party, and then he got on the plane, that you also wrote, I thought, very perceptively about the slights that if it happens in a let's just for better words call it biological family, like you had what you called the high-buy fights, you had the photograph fights, that the stepkids
they would come in and your stepdaughters, and you didn't say hello first.
Right, and that's noticed.
Because with your own kids, or an effectively blended family, nobody notices. They're not keeping score, but somehow
there's a keeping score quality,
keeping
right?
Score.
So that was our very first blended family fight, if you can imagine, and that's why this needs to be out there, because every single person I've talked to in a blended family, their number one complaint is, the stepkids will walk in and they won't say hi. In this case, my bonus daughter thought I didn't say hi to her. And, sometimes when I'm at my computer and I'm writing, maybe that's true, maybe it wasn't. But it became another issue in a blended family where I don't feel comfortable disciplining other people's children. And this could be on a field trip with other kids. Like, I just cannot yell at other people's children. And I never felt comfortable disciplining his kids or saying something to his kids. Likewise, my daughter would always come to me if she had a problem with him. So there was a lot of kind of tattletaling going on after that first high-buy fight. So whenever there was an issue, his kids would go to him, then he would come to me, and it became a very bad game of broken television.
Well, it's a tough diplomacy. I know of a step-parent who, I love that you raised the photographs, because this step-parent, what she would do is she would have photographs of all the people in favor at that moment. And she would change up. Like, what is so terrifying about this, I think if you're a kid and you walk into a house and you see all these photos of your cousin, but none of you, and there are hundreds of photos. It's not like there's 3. And you're not there. And it's a weird thing to have to complain about, right? Like, you can't go to that person and say, why isn't there a photo of me?
But it's hurtful.
But it's because kids do keep score. Kids are the ultimate scorekeepers. They notice
nothing escapes.
Yeah, like, he got 3 Smarties, I only got 2. What's going on? Christmas presents. Like, there has to be absolute parity. And so maybe what this high-buy, and I think, or whatever these slights are, it's not obviously about whether you say hi or not first. It's about a perception of inequality. And that's what these photos come down to, and all these other, as you say, ridiculous slights that wouldn't, be noticed.
Yeah, like little things that turn into 3-year wars, right? Like, so, but likewise, my bonus daughter had been in my life for 6 years when she went off to university, and of course, I didn't go for the day she moved in because her mother was there and my partner was there, and I never felt comfortable with his ex-wife. We didn't start off on a very good foot, and we just never. We were not the type that were, drinking wine together and laughing about, his quirks, right? Yeah, so when my bonus daughter moved into her dorm room, I noticed that there was and she had been in my life for 6 years and my daughter's life for 6 years, there was no pictures of me or her daughter. And I wasn't offended about me. By that point, I realized where I was, on the priorities list here. But I was kind of in shock about, I was just like, on behalf of my daughter, I was kind of like, you've been living with her 50% of the time for 6 years and you don't have a picture up of her. So, I don't come across in this, if people think that, I'm just criticizing my ex or the stepchildren, it's not that at all, because in many, many moments I am very, my reactions looking back are so immature and my resentments were so silly looking back. But when you're living it,
But they are the iceberg tips, and in a way, what those photos, I guess, were saying, and this is why I'm obsessed with photos, as you can tell, because I've seen it, and it does feel kind of deliberate.
I have photos of you all over my house.
Same, Christina, same. But the that what she was sort of saying is, and as revealed in the photographs. That is, that I'm making a statement of what matters to me most and what doesn't. And you seen that is hurtful because, as you say, you've been in these lives. But then you also noted, and not just in your situation, in many of these other blended families that then broke up, these kids had intense relations with their stepfather, stepmother, and then it vanished, over time. Sometimes quickly, sometimes not. And it's painful.
And when you go back to the question of love, like, listen, when you unblend blended family, it's even worse than just your traditional divorce. And it was, I was so saddened by the whole thing. I could barely take care of myself and my daughter and my son. I was so, saddened by all of this that I didn't realize that, when you unblend, you don't just lose your partner, you lose their children sometimes as well. And in my case, that's what happened. And it wasn't until only about 6 months after we had broken up, and I picked myself up and could get out of bed and, do my thing and raise my kids, that I realized I really miss these girls. I had such a, love. Did I love them? I don't know. I could sit here for hours and think about love and what is love, but I definitely had a deep fondness for them. And ironically, this is funny. I was saying, I was saying to a friend that, I don't hear from them. It's only when I reach out when they get a new job or they're graduating university. But today one of them reached out for me, but it was to get money for a fundraiser.
Oh, you had to buy wrapping paper or cookies or something?
I had to donate money for a charity run. So, but that's the only time she's actually reached out to me, and it's now been more than a year.
Was your daughter good friends with them? Did they have fun most of the time?
Well, this is the other thing no one talks about. Considering they were all girls and all just 2 years apart, I would have thought they had bonded more than they did. They don't keep in touch either, which is weird because they all have a brother
in common.
And how's he? Yeah, how does he?
It's crazy.
How does he balance?
How old is he now? Holt is his name, right?
Holt. He's turning 7 next week.
Oh, so he's like a pretty big kid at this point.
Yeah, no, and listen.
He probably loves everybody.
he grew up watching his sister go off with her father, and his other two sisters go off with their mother. So to him, when we broke up, everyone says, "Is he affected?" I'm like, "No, he thinks it's just normal." And it's like, when did it become normal to be like the kid, one kid who stays at home while three others are going off to their other parent? Like, that's normal now.
You know, I was thinking as you were talking.
Did the divorce affect him? Not really.
I was thinking as you were talking, another thing, as you mentioned in passing, that so you had this blended family, but the girls would go off half time and not be there. So there was constant adjusting and readjusting. So they'd leave the house. Was it half the week? How was it divided?
Yeah, and it was like 50-50. It was 50-50. So, and in fact, this also has to do with blended families, and as we were talking about earlier, about how you're still attached to that person's ex. So from the very beginning, I wanted our girls to bond. So my daughter had been going to an overnight camp. His kids had just been going to day camps. And so I wanted them all to go to this overnight camp together so they could all spend the summer together. It's one of these camps where you don't just stick with your cabin. You can pick whatever programs you want. So I thought they could bond that way. But his ex-wife, for whatever reason, and it will remain a mystery to me, did not want her kids going to this camp. And so my daughter and his daughters never spent one summer together in 7 years.
Yeah, so you know, those who have not experienced this don't know much about it.
Right.
And yet it's happening. It's becoming not quite the norm, but approaching the norm for many kids. And these families fail a lot. So knowing what you know.
Yes.
And people out there that are going to do this.
Or are doing it.
Yeah, what is your advice? And if you were to do it again, knowing what you know, what would you have done differently?
Well, I think there's two things. I think maybe I was just not meant to be in a blended family. I honestly do truthfully think that. Maybe maybe I was a little too selfish. Maybe I didn't have a big enough heart. I come down on myself a lot thinking about it, but maybe some people are just not meant to be in blended families, one thing. So you really have to reflect on yourself and will you open your heart up enough? Can you love other children? Can you make things equal? Like, are you that type of person is number one. And the second thing is, don't rush. I mean, we rushed and we didn't talk about anything. But the other argument is, my daughter was my number one priority. Like, she was my life. She lived with me for 7 years, but just our own. So I wasn't going to hide her from people I was dating. I made it pretty obvious that, she was front and center. And, and I'm sure my ex felt that a lot of the time, that I was always fighting with my daughter. I would always be sticking up for my daughter. And he's not wrong.
Right. Well, these are even problems with people, the biological parents. Sometimes it's a problem with the mothers too obsessed with the child and ignores. But then you take a blended family, and these problems are much more intense. And
yeah, I was going to say, there's always a Johnny Cochran parent in the family.
And also, I think that also, but from his end, I don't want to make this a sweeping generalization, but with the guys I've dated who have been fathers, there seems to be a lot of dad guilt that mothers don't really have. Like, we might feel guilty for a breakup, but then we can kind of get on with it, and we want to, we do our self-care, and then we know we're strong enough to raise our kids happily. But dads seem, for some reason, to have this guilt that they carry on. So that also played into a lot of it, because whenever they were with us, it was always about them. And I think it's because he felt so guilty over the...
Oh, yeah, you'd say he'd become like a Michelin star chef when they were around, and then like that frog cartoon and Looney Tunes, and then when other people, when you were there, you just ribbit.
Here's your bowl of cereal, Rebecca, but my kids are coming. Oh, we have to,
Well, but as you say, men have a different type of guilt. I mean, many men go on to other families and forget even their first biological families. That's a sad truth.
That's a sad reality.
That's a sad reality. But they also, I think, mothers are just more intuitively connected to their children, and in a way, from my own blended family experience, I don't have stepchildren, but I was a stepsister. It really was my mother who made it work. The two mothers, my stepfather's ex-wife, my stepmother, my mother, they all had to work together they are the ones ultimately controlling the date book and saying, where are you going to be this summer? And, the fathers could be great, but they were definitely, maybe it was a different time, but they were definitely detached from the
everyday rhythms.
The everyday rhythms, exactly.
Yeah, now I find that the opposite. Like with the divorced men, when they have their children, they really have their children. I mean, every weekend they were with us, we had to go to a mall because that's what they like to do. They like shopping. And that's another thing. I mean, I realized quite early on that, taking them to museums or art galleries, that was just not their thing. That was me and my daughter's thing. We kind of, she loved going to the museum and art galleries and things like that. But that was just not their thing. And I personally hate malls. I get mall headache. I don't like it. So a lot of the times I took myself out of the equation of going out with them. Looking back again, I probably should have tried harder. We all should have tried harder. That's, I guess.
Well, but you're talking about, and this is actually, Christina, what you said, that's a perfect phrase, the everyday rhythm, that most families, they're not doing outings. Like, that's the other thing, because you get this custody for a couple days. You feel you got to make a big thing about it. You got to go to the circus. You've got to, you got to do this. You got to do that.
Cirque du Soleil.
Got tickets this week, or we have to go shop and buy you stuff. There's not just like, what are you doing today? Nothing. What are you doing today?
Yeah,
Nothing.
why couldn't they just go out and play?
Or not even play, just hang about. And, that, I guess that's the other thing, right? Like this need for performance of the
guilty father.
And I'm sure guilty mother too. Less so, I guess.
But also it could be just the kids' personality, because they were not the type of kids that just liked sitting around. And they didn't like that. They wanted to go to shopping, and they wanted to do things all the time. And it was hard on me too, because
do you think if you had a lot more money, does it make it easier? Well, money obviously makes everything easier, but I'm just wondering if...
Oh, no, then you get the poor little rich kids, they're thrown with the nannies, richie rich.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a lack of money in this.
I always say, like, if you're marrying for money, you're going to pay for it for the rest of your life.
No, I'm just thinking like...
You don't marry for money.
You could just send them away on send them shopping in an Uber.
Christine, I don't think that would solve the underlying tensions.
I'm thinking that Uber.
Uber is not a step parent.
Too. Like, I literally bought a place in Mexico so we could bond there.
Yeah.
But then what happened, and I paid for it all by myself.
Yeah, this is a pattern that's a problem, Rebecca. I'm just saying.
But then the problem became, well, he had to pay for 2 plane tickets for his kid. I only had to pay for a plane ticket for my kid. And then what? Do we split the bill for our bio kid? Like,
but wait, you were paying for the house.
Yeah, see, this is also, it gets down to it's like unionized negotiations.
No, I think one mistake, I think maybe it's better in families just to have a common source of income, and well, maybe that wouldn't work with a blended family.
Well, it can.
Well, I mean, he did contribute in other ways, and I think this is happening a lot nowadays. Like, women, our self-esteem is tied to, like, people loving us, and men's self-esteem is kind of tied to money. So I feel like, he did a lot, as a quote, I say this in quotes, as an entrepreneur, he was his own boss. And so when he came home, I think he felt a little bit like an employee, because his way of chipping in was to cook and to clean, to clean up. Like, that became our rhythm.
Not a good. The money dynamic is a killer. I think.
I'm just going to say no one will like me saying this, but I do think women, on average, typically like to feel protected
or taken
care of.
And or at least somebody wanting to take care of you.
It's true.
Last question for you, Rebecca. It is a very candid book. It's a very candid book about your ex and his family. And have they read it? Have you heard from anyone?
You know what? There's been excerpts out. My guess is 100% they have read at least excerpts from the book.
Yeah.
If not the book itself. And to that I say, listen, I couldn't write my truth without, I wrote it as if they were not going to read it. The mother-in-law doesn't talk to, my ex-mother-in-law doesn't talk to me anyway, so is that wrong to say? Well, she doesn't talk to me anyway, so I don't think she's going to be more angry at me.
Yeah.
But I think I don't, I hate to say it, but it's not like I ever saw him read a book before. So if he's reading this, then, good for you.
Hey, Rebecca, it might be an audiobook.
Yeah. But like I said, it's not like they didn't know what I did for a living. I was a personal journalist for many, many years. Yeah. So they can't, have me just writing about the good and not writing about the bad.
Well, you said he blocked you on social media, which I also think is a very modern thing, right? Like, you can't look at what we're doing with our kids. Like, they don't want you to see the personal life that they're living now.
Yeah, no, and it was funny because one of my friends saw him on one of the dating apps, and his description of what he was looking for was like, "That's me. You were looking for me," but.
Well, he's looking for another sugar mommy.
That's kind of sad.
So yeah, I mean, it's just it's an incredible story. As you could tell, we're talking and it's a little choppy, but it's such an incredible story, and the response I'm getting from people is just so. I mean, they're sharing these stories with me that are so personal and sometimes so heart-wrenching. That I'm kind of glad this book is out there.
Rebecca, it's a very human story, and it's one, and the way you write about it, it's very engaging, and there's just a lot of truth there. And there, not everybody behaved well on either side, as you acknowledge, but this is what we are.
Actually, the one person who seemed to have behaved consistently well by your telling is your first husband, the father of your daughter. He seems to uncomplainingly have paid for half the house that your recent ex, cheerfully lived in at his expense.
And to my ex's credit, he said, "Congratulations."
Well, I think there's a next chapter. Look, you went on better vacations with your first husband. You went on better vacations with your first husband. He owns half the house. He was there at the hospital. Rebecca, are you blind?
Yeah, I think that ship has. If you would like to know, I am dating someone.
Oh.
Does he have children?
Has a job.
He has a job, but does he have kids?
He does, but the good news is that I will never be living with them because one of them is already living with the girlfriend, and
they're older.
They're way older. So this he's about 10 years older than me, which means nothing. Like after the age of 40. So I don't think I would ever blend like that again.
I have a crazy proposal to think of while you're dating this older guy with older children. And this is something I haven't understood. When you get past the fact that kids are living in your house and you have to be a kind of stepmother or stepfather, you are, for better or worse, taking on a parental role. When the kids are out of the house, why do you have to blend? Why can't you don't have to marry? You can just say, this is mommy's friend, this is dad. Well, you don't have to say mommy because they're obviously adults. But this whole idea after a certain point where you have to make it a happy family, you don't. They're grown-up
Because
kids.
then there's a whole question of inheritance.
Yeah, those.
See, my ideal would be to live next door or across the street from someone.
That's my idea.
That's your ideal.
That was like, you do your hanky panky. Good night. I'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yep,
Because
and
I'm
then
really
you-
fucking
and then you
cranky
do
in the
everything else.
morning, and no one wants
Right.
to wake up
Keep two
in
houses.
the morning.
Keep two houses.
I know an older couple, and this does strike me in this situation as the perfect compromise.
I hope you're not talking about me.
No,
Okay.
you haven't made the perfect compromise yet.
Okay.
But they are, yeah, I think they're both in their late 60s, early 70s.
Well, that can't be me.
No, it's not you. It's not always about you, Christina. But they have separate houses. She has kids. He doesn't. They haven't gotten married. They spend every summer together.
Who is this?
I'm not going to tell it on air, but they have come to this wonderful accommodation. And he's involved in her kids' lives. He's not like a indifferent or aloof stranger. But there's none of that pressure, like, oh my God, I gotta be a stepfather. There aren't those sort of emotionally bureaucratic
Right.
issues that you have to work through. They're companions. They love each other. They spend time together. But as you say, at the end of the day, you can go home to your place. He can go home to his place. And that strikes me as a certain age, a kind of great thing. Well, Rebecca, good luck with this book. I was just found it gripping. I think I read it in 2 sittings, and I would have read it in 1 if I didn't have kids of my own, like interrupting all the time. But
Yeah, they do.
it was really great. And good luck with it.
Thank you so much.
And we loved having you on. So
Yeah, and good luck.
And next time, if you get me on tequila, I'll even tell you more juice.
okay, so you know what? Let's plan that one.
Plan that, because I think there's still more we can get from her.
I think Christina, you and I need to return to Toronto and have tequila with Rebecca. I think that's what we're
Yes,
going
you
to do.
do.
Okay.
All right. Good luck. Thank
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So I wouldn't mind if Rebecca was my stepmom.
Well, you don't know. You don't really know.
No. Actually, I'm glad I had my mom. And it was just...
Yeah, you see, you didn't grow up in a step family. You had to create one, and you seem to have done so very, very successfully.
But I think if people were to analyze all the data, they would find that, I mean, Tamler came into my life, he was very young.
Yeah,
He was 3.5, 4 years old.
right.
So it was just, he grew up with me. I mean, we grew up together, and there wasn't, our house was his house. And as I said, he and his mother and I got along. But my own life, well, I mean, I'm thinking now, like, if I had divorced Fred and taken David and had some new father and who didn't really love him the way, I mean, that would...
Well, you get thrown in the middle. And even in the best, I think we had pretty great circumstances in our family.
Yeah.
But there were times, and what was sort of great about my parents is they never let me know about it, that there were times where, my mother wasn't speaking to my father or whatever. And
To Pete.
no, to my father.
Oh, because I can't imagine
no.
Yvonne not speaking to Pete.
No, but everything went seamlessly.
I knew even I love your you had the best stepfather.
I did have the best
I mean, he's
stepfather.
like, for the record. I mean, the first time I met him, I didn't know you that would be said, oh, this is my stepfather. And he sat next to me at a dinner, and I thought, oh, okay.
Yeah, family.
And, I've got to be like, I loved him from the moment we started to talk.
No, what was funny is, so speaking of not great first impressions. So when I met him, I was, I guess, 5. I was a tiny kid. I was skinny. I weighed like 10 pounds. I was tiny.
Izzy, you were...
I was Izzy, and as fierce, and as mouthy as Izzy. But he didn't know it. I was so shy. There was this new man in our house, and
You would run away.
I'd hide, and he would
Skitterish.
catch me like peering around a doorway, looking at him, and then he'd look up and he'd go, "Hi, Danielle," and I would bolt, and he thought I was a really sucky kid. And he had been a soldier. He was this foreign correspondent. He looked like Sean Connery. I mean, he's so glamorous.
And a war hero.
And so anyway, but I was sort of terrified and shy. And then he took us, but he was such a like going to the amusement parks and things. He was a kid himself. He loved doing these things. So he took us to one of those big neighborhood pools, vast pools with thousands of kids in it. No, just like a big community pool with a high slide. And I asked him shyly if he would, let me catch me at the bottom of the slide if I went down the slide. So he said, okay. So I went to the top, especially for my size. I look so tiny, like a little flea circus, And I get to the top of the slide and I plunge down. And he's at the bottom and he watches me fly off the slide and sink like a stone. And I hadn't told him that I can't swim.
Oh, no. You went up the deep end.
And he looks at me for a few seconds, sort of sinking to the bottom of the pool. And he reaches down and he pulls me out of the water. And I was like spluttering. I said, I can't swim. And he said, from that moment on, he said, I just loved you. I thought you were a sucky kid, but if you're the type of kid who will go off a slide and can't swim, you're my kind of kid. So we were very, very close, and it was magical, but it wasn't, my mom was often put in the middle of things, kids become teenagers, but they both made it really work. And my father and my stepmother was always, there were problems on that side, but she was always, again, welcoming. She didn't try to be my mother. She was always fair. And she brought other things. She was like a wonderful reader, and she brought me great books. And so people can find their niches, but I think maybe sort of the Disney stepmother is based not on you and not on Rebecca, but there are kind of new families where the stepmother, especially as we discover, like a lot of men are marrying younger women, they don't have children, and this is where it becomes Disney. Like they want to erase anything that came before them.
Right.
Like your children, your previous life is not part of my story, and therefore I don't want it. And that's where you get the
pathology.
And I can't love your kids. Your kids are an annoyance. Your kids are a reminder of previous lives and
kids. And this is just I don't even know if we fully understand what we've done with the divorce revolution and the blended families, and it's all supposed to be for the better, and maybe it is, but
I do remember. I know we have terrible, statistics like the one thing you can do for your kids is not get separated or divorced, right? Like even if it's a bad marriage, you read that intact families, parents who don't get divorced, the kids do much, much better.
Right.
I remember just to make divorced parents feel a little better. I remember my earliest memories of my dad, my true father, were of them arguing, having terrible fights, and then my dad just not being there half the time, but we didn't know where he was. Or I'm sure my mother knew,
that
but
must have been frightening.
It was terrifying. All I remember was saying, "When's Daddy coming home? When's Daddy coming home?" And once they got formally separated, and then I didn't expect him to be home, and there were no more fights. And then, my wonderful stepfather came into my life. For me, that was great. It was stability. I think kids want stability. They want equality. They want routine.
And they need an environment where they can grow. And if they keep being replanted and repotted, and then all of these, threats, no, it needs to be so. Whatever your parents did, it worked so well with you.
Well, they took it seriously.
But I do think the message to take from this book is if you're even thinking of doing this, which of course many people are, I think it can succeed, but don't pretend it's going to be easy. Work out beforehand.
Everything
about fundamental things like discipline. And I honestly think that a step parent, if the child is over 8 or 9, the step parent probably should not be doing the discipline. Should just be the natural parent in the home because otherwise...
But you know what? My stepfather disciplined me all the time, and I always respected it.
He was special.
True. I guess it's sort of respect. Like if he said stop doing it, you know.
It is
like,
kind of respect.
I was like, yeah, you're right. Anyway, well, that was fascinating. We don't have time because, again, we've got to stop. We're becoming longer and longer. But if these...
Oh, I forgot one story that shocked me about my stepson, Tamler.
Oh, okay.
I may have told this before, but
we're going to reveal this.
Just in case I didn't.
Yeah.
So he has a podcast, The Very Bad Wizards. And
plug.
Yeah, plug. But they don't plug the phlegm splainers.
That's when we start talking about our boogers and our mucus.
And our monthly...
no, that's a different podcast. But the phlegm splainers, yes.
Phlegm splainers. So when I was protested at Lewis and Clark College, they called me a known fascist. And so on his podcast, he hates me to call him his sidekick, but Tamler's sidekick, Pizarro, his friend, psychologist.
Pizarro?
Pizarro.
Oh, Pizarro, like the painter?
No, spelled differently.
Okay, anyway, go on.
I'm not sure. Anyway, he's a Cornell psychologist, and they have this podcast. And Pizarro said, how does it feel to have your stepmom called a known fascist? I mean, did you know she was a fascist? And Tamler said, I didn't, but it was kind of like that moment in The Usual Suspects and Kaiser Soze, like, oh, God, you look back at and Tamler said, I'm thinking, she was a fascist. Like that time she wouldn't let me stop for miniature golf. And he did. We were driving to Canada. He was 4.5.
And he wanted to stop for miniature golf.
It was raining. It was getting dark.
Him.
I was a fascist.
Yeah, all parents are fascists to their children.
I know. It's
all the good ones. All right. Well, we don't have time to do a lot of reader reaction, but since we were talking about my mom, I just want you to know because, okay, so every week she listens to our podcast and she's always wonderful. She always says, that was a wonderful podcast, which is what you want your mom to say.
Right.
It's even better if you say, that was the best podcast. And you say that every week. Right. That's a great, Mom, that's a great thing to say. So I opened my email just before we come to the studio, and I have a message from my mom, and she says, tell Christina I sympathize with her need to talk about the cultural phenomenon that is Game of Thrones. It's like not having seen at least the first Star Wars. Okay, Mom, I take that. You're chastising me. But then she sends a second one a few minutes later. Like if that's not bad enough. Like you, I couldn't get through Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, the books. But at least I saw a movie of each just to know what was going on in the world.
I agree. And
I agree with
my own mother is saying I'm out of it.
This is why she was able to have a blended family.
Why?
She has insight into human reality.
And she has magic.
And she has magic.
And now I'm thinking, like, I mentioned Kaiser Soze and Usual Suspects. Like
I've seen that movie. I couldn't remember the name.
I haven't.
Okay, you have. All right. That is unacceptable.
Okay.
It's a great
Well, I love how, speaking of fascists, you're not like the popular culturals are. Like, look, Mom, I read the Harry Potter books. I said I couldn't read Lord of the Rings, and Christopher Hitchens affirmed it was a chap thing, but I did see the first Lord of the Ring movies, and I saw the first Harry Potter. And the problem with those movies based on these types of books is they're all special effects. The plot makes no sense if you haven't read the book. It's just kind of this amalgam of
what
a
about
video
Wind
game.
in the Willows?
You know why that doesn't hold up? Much of it does.
It holds up.
Oh no, it's actually there were some beautiful series done. Yeah. BBC, of course, right. Wind in the Willows. No, I remember reading when you start reading older books to your kids, like the era of pre-television.
They go on and on.
So much scenery in Wind of the Willows and weather. So much scene. And I remember reading them, and my kids love being read to. All kids do. But I'd be going, there'd be Ratty and Toad, and I love Mr. Toad and his wild rides and things. And then you'd get, and literally a page and a half of scenery. And it was beautiful if you're a grown-up. But in an era where the attention spans are short, even for little kids who are really like into it.
But tonight, not tonight, because no time. But I want to sit down with you and watch Usual.
Okay, well, we will. Well, Christina, before we go, we're about to, once we say goodbye to our podcast listeners, we're then going to go on and record our last call episode that is only available to those who
support us,
who subscribe at Patreon or We Gather. And
We Gather, if you don't want to subscribe with Patreon, we've got We Gather and Patreon.
Patreon.com/Femsplainers, WeGather.com/Femsplainers. We're not joking. We don't want to have to go to a paywall, and we're not even looking to clean up here. We're just looking to meet our costs of producing this. If we can meet our costs for producing this and, maybe a little bit of money for cocktail money, we will be very happy. But we really, really need your support, and we do give back.
Tell them what they're going to miss.
Okay, so we do it.
This is over. We're going to discuss
so many secret things, our secret confessions when we've had too much to drink.
Which is now.
And
we record this at the end of the podcast.
Right.
We both...
Yeah, so we're kind of like freewheeling here.
We don't care.
We're
just going to say it.
So, and you can ask us questions. We give you alerts to our upcoming guests, and you can ask them questions.
But we're going to discuss a specific topic, which is we got some pushback, some questions, some concerns about what we said about abortion.
Okay, so we're saving that. And we also have questions for Vicki Ward, Helen Andrews. We've had a lot this month. And you can ask us questions. You can ask us really anything, especially at this stage of the podcast. So just support us. If we meet our costs, we'll be so happy. We'll stop these fundraising drives. Well, we won't, but we'll be happy. we have to keep Zoe in her headphones. But anyway, so please support us, and thank you, and see you next week.
And stay tuned for some great stuff about
those who are subscribing.
Yeah.
Bye. Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Stay with us by following us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. You can always email questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com. We read every one.
We record at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. And thanks to AEI Research Assistant Zoe Appler, who is our production assistant here in the studio, and thanks to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor, and occasional millennial mansplainer.
And listen to us on pretty much any of your favorite podcast platforms. And please remember to subscribe and like us at iTunes if possible. Every like helps us keep our solid 5-star rating. Cheers.